Okay guys, so in this video we're going to go over primary keys again, and we're going to look at other constraints as well. So I'm just going to delete this from here, and we're going to create that test table again. So I'm going to say create table test, and our brackets and semicolon here, and inside of it there's two columns I want to add here. Now, I know a lot of you, because of the previous videos, you got used to the idea that ID is usually used as the primary key. Now, this is true in some cases, but it's not always the primary key. Any column can be the primary key as long as it's unique. So here I'm going to say product, and it's going to be varchar 50. And then a comma, and on the next line I'm going to say price here, and the price is going to be of type int. Now notice I haven't even included a primary key here. We're going to create this table without a primary key and see how we can assign the primary key later on. So I'm going to run this, and it created successfully. So down here I'm going to say select star from test, and let's select just this line of code so that it doesn't run the create again, and I'm going to hit run here, and now we can see we have product and price here. So let's see how we can actually add a primary key constraint to product here. So again, I'm going to leave this code here just so that we can see everything while we're typing and we don't get confused later on about what's in here and what's not. And below this, I'm just going to make some space, and I'm going to say alter table, and then we give a table name, so it's test. And before I even do any of this, let's refresh here, and on our test table here we want to click this info button. It's the first button next to it, and in this thing that pops up we want to go to the last tab here, and this basically shows us what's in the table right now. So right now we just have product and price, and you can see it doesn't say primary key anywhere here. So let's go back to our code here, and the code we want to write again is alter table. So we're altering a table, and the table we want to alter is test. Now I'm going to split this into two lines. You can continue typing the code up here if you want, but on the next line what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add constraint, and make sure you've spelled that correctly. And then on the third line here I'm going to say what constraint I want to add. So I want to add primary key, and then in brackets here which column do we want to add it to. So I want to add this to the product column. So this column right here, we want each product to be unique. Now you notice here that I wrote this code on 3 lines. I split it up across 3 lines, but it's just one piece of code, so I could have written all of this on 1 line if I wanted to, like this. But just so that it's a bit easier to read, we like to separate our code this way. Now I'm going to add in my semicolon here, and I'm going to select all of this that we just wrote, and I'm going to hit run here. And it shows a green check mark there, so it ran successfully. Now let's go back to the second page we opened where it shows us the information, and it hasn't updated here yet, so I'm going to close this. I'm going to hit refresh here, and then again on the test table here let's hit this info button, and we go to the last tab here, and now you can see we have a primary key, and it's the product column here. So we've successfully added a primary key to our table. So I'm going to close this. And okay, now let's try inserting some data into our table. So I'm going to insert into test, and remember before we used these brackets and we specified which values we want to pass in. but we had to do that because we weren't passing in a value for every single column. Remember, we had auto increment on the ID, but here nothing is auto incrementing or has a default value, so we're going to pass in both product and price. So because of that, we don't need to use our brackets here. We can just say values, and for the values here, I want to pass for a product name. I'll just say Bob here because that's what we've been using all this time. And then for a price, I'm going to say 11 here. And I'll add my semicolon. And now if we run this line of code, and then we select everything in the table, we can see that we now have an entry for product Bob, and the price is 11. Now if I change this, for example, I said Bob and 12, if I run this, you should expect to see another row here where it says Bob and 12. But when I run this, it will actually give us an error. And if I select everything in the table, it didn't add a second row here. That's because product is now a primary key, meaning we can't have the same value Bob for more than one entry here. If I change this to something like John, and now let's select the select statement and the insert at once so we can run both of them. And I run this, you can see that we now have two values here. One is Bob and one is John. And again, we can't run this code twice. It's going to give us an error again because now we're trying to insert John again and we already have someone named John in there. So that's basically how primary keys work. Now let's talk about constraints in general because there's more constraints than just primary keys. So I've gone ahead and searched for MySQL constraints here, and there's an article by W3 Schools, so I'm going to click on that. And down here it just gives you a list of all the different constraints that we have in MySQL. So for this video, I'm not going to go over every single constraint because you can go through this list yourself, but let's do one more. So we'll do this check constraint here. So let's head back to the code. Okay, and now I'm going to get rid of this alter table up here because we're going to write a new one. And by the way, you don't need to keep any code here. I'm just keeping it here so that when you're watching the video, you can keep track of what we have in our table and so on. But what we're going to do next is alter table. And don't forget to put your table name here. It's test. And then again, I'm going to split this into multiple lines. So on the next line here, I'm going to say add constraint. And make sure you spell that correctly. And this is how we add constraints. We just type add constraint here. And on the next line here, actually, let me just type it on this line. We're going to give our constraint a name. So I'm going to call this min underscore price. And then on the next line here, I'm going to say check. Because remember, the check is what type of constraint we're adding. We're using this one here. And to use this check constraint, you add in your brackets here. And what do we want to check? So we want to check if price is greater than 10. Now before I run this, let me add my semicolon and explain what this check constraint will do. So we're adding this check constraint to the price column here. And we're making sure that price is greater than 10. So in other words, if the price is not greater than 10, it will violate this check constraint that we put in place here, and the data won't be inserted into our table. So I'm just going to run this, and it gives me a green check mark, so everything is good. And now let's add in a new value here. We want to say Tony, and his number can be 7. So remember, 7 is going to be less than 10 here, so it's going to violate this check that we just made. And if I try and run this, so I select it and click run, it's going to give me an error down here, and it says check constraint min price is violated. So now if I try to select everything in the table, it's not going to show me Tony as some data that's been inserted here, because this insert statement basically failed because we violated this check here that we added. Now if I change this to something like 11 and we ran this, it would succeed because 11 is greater than 10, so it would pass this min price check here and it would be added to the table. So this is how you'd use constraints, and specifically the check constraint in MySQL. And you can just go through this list and try out all the different constraints here. But now let's look at how we can get rid of the constraint we just added, because maybe we set the min price to 10, but now in the future we don't want that rule anymore. Now we can accept other prices. So down here I'm going to say alter table again, and then the table name, which is test, and then on the next line I'm going to say drop constraint, and we need to pass in the constraint name. So when you're naming your constraints, make sure you give them easy to remember names, because you're going to type it in like here where we need to drop it, min underscore price, and I'll add my semicolon, and let's run this line of code here, and it gives me a check mark, so it's been completed successfully. Now let's add in another entry here. I'm going to say stew, and the price will be 1. So 1 is definitely less than 10, but we dropped the constraint, so now this should work. Let's select it and run. And yeah, it looks like it was added. So if we select everything and we run it, we can now see stew here and the value is 1. So yeah, that's how you can create and drop constraints. Again, remember when you're naming it, give it a easy to remember and meaningful name, so that later on when you want to drop it or something, it's easy to remember. You don't need to go searching for what you typed before. And you might have already deleted that code where you created the constraint, so now you'll be searching everywhere for what was the constraint name. But again, if you remember, when we violated that constraint, it gave us the name in the errors down here, so that's the easy way to find it. But hopefully you don't need to do that and you remember the name of all the constraints you create. But yeah, for this video, that's going to be it. The last thing I'm going to do here is just get rid of this test table because we don't need it anymore. So again, that syntax is drop table test. And this test is the name of the table we want to drop. So I'm going to run this and we get a green check mark. So everything is done. So guys, that's all I have to show you for this video. Make sure you tune in for the next video where we'll be talking about primary keys and foreign keys and how they relate to each other. So that's how we connect different databases together. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.